Okay, welcome back to Comic Book History, episode 63. We're now moving into the 1980s, a very interesting time period for the Avengers. The first half of this particular decade is a very strange one per se. Some good stuff, some bad stuff. Now, this decade had the most amount of writers, basically, for this era for the Avengers. You had Jim Shooter, Rob Macchio, very good writer. I highly recommend this guy's work. He did a lot of work with the Black Widow. John Byrne, who was the most notorious writer for this decade, and Stephen Grant basically got a chance to write some issues of this book, which that's interesting. Roger Stern wrote a lot of the issues that came out this period of time. The decade started off with a very good start with the debut of the Taskmaster. Very good start in Avengers 196. And then right after that, we had the build-up to a very controversial issue, Avengers 200. By far, one of the most probably the number one most hated triple-digit Avengers comic book of all time. Second behind that is Avengers 500. Yep. This book had 4 writers on it: Jim Shooter, Bob Layton, George Perez, and Dave Michelini. Also, apparently, George Perez had this thing. If you read any book that he drew during this period, even in the 80s, Scarlet Witch and Raven have something common. Basically, it's how he drew their bellies. Yes, he gave sort of like a roundish belly to make some fans might think they might be pregnant, even though that they're not. As far as I can tell, Raven has never had kids, not to my knowledge. No. In the case of Scarlet Witch, yes, though that I can explain a little bit later. Yes. And then if you can move past that particular garbage, of course this was resolved in the 10th annual for Avengers. Written by Chris Claremont, kind of fixed it. With, also the debut of Rogue. Yep, Rogue. Also started a recurring joke whenever Carol Danvers, when she fell from the sky, fell into the water, it's up to frickin' Spider-Woman to save her. Yes, 200, I've discussed this one before when I talk about Carol Danvers and her own comic history. Linkara talked about basically this issue in length and how really bad it is. Yes. Now, the only thing good about it is the artwork. And, of course, they did kind of retcon some stuff with the annual. And then, right after this, we had a very interesting time period when it comes to Avengers. We had a 2-year storyline that dealt with Hank Pym. Yes. A storyline started issue 202 and didn't wrap up to 230. This is an excellent storyline known as The Trial of the Yellow Jacket. Yes. Where, in this storyline, Hank Pym starts a mental breakdown, and then he decides to kill a one-shot villain known as the Elf Queen. But before this has one of the most controversial moments ever in the history of the Avengers comics. Almost as controversial as the rape of Carol Danvers. Hank Pym slapping his wife. Yep, he slapped her. The event that is basically still talked about in comic books. It was referenced in Secret Empire by, I think it was Iron told us. He says, "You became a joke when you slapped Janet." Yes. And by the way, his own daughter found out about this in the 2015 Avengers. I think she found out about it in her own spin-off in her solo book. Yes, so right after this slap, Janet Van Dyne divorced him, took all the man's money. Yep, left him broke. So he decided to kind of in a way briefly work with Masters of Evil here, though he ended up basically getting into a fight with his old enemy, Egghead. Yes, Egghead basically tried to kill Hank Pym, even after Hank Pym defeated him. He says, "Oh yeah, I could have beat you with Ant-Man, Giant Man, Goliath, or even frickin' Yellowjacket. I could beat you with myself." So, then you have Egghead pointing a gun at, Hank Pym's head. Well, not directly, of course. He points at him. And then all of a sudden, from out of the shadows, Hawkeye fires an arrow into his gun, basically exploding in Egghead's face, kind of accidentally killing him. And he was kind of turned to local authorities, and they basically cleared him of everything. It was just an accidental death. It was basically rules, self-defense. The Avengers themselves basically gave him some punishment, but not very much came of it. Though, of course, Janet and Hank Pym did reconcile, and then a couple again. Though Hank Pym did retire from being a superhero for a while, for about several years. And then, of course, like right after this, I would say within the next few years, well, we had something quite interesting happen. We had, well, let's just say we had the Undersea Storyline. Very good storyline. By far, for some fans of the Avengers series, the definitive Avengers storyline. It's where the mansion is under siege from the Masters of Evil. Yes, the Masters of Evil technically never did this before, but Roger Stern did it. He actually had him do this. Yep. And it was also during this period of time, like just prior to this, we also had the Vision take command. Yeah, there's also an issue basically where he did this. And, well, and also during this period of time, we also had Secret Wars 1 and 2. Both done by Jim Shooter, who was also at one point the writer of the Avengers book. Though he left prior to that. Avengers involved in that. They play a big role in it. Now, technically Secret Wars is not their first crossover they did. The first one they did was Contest of Champions. Jim Shooter read that one. That was Mike Greenwald who wrote that one. Which that particular event did get referenced mildly after that, but not really bigly. Secret Wars, the original one, gets a lot more reference than that one does. Of course, Secret Wars 2 came 1 year later. Yep. The late 80s did experiment with something that we still see this very day. The Avengers title being having a tie into some big event, per se. Yeah. Where, like, as soon as the Avengers came back from space, they apparently got so big, Vision's like, Hawkeye, I want to take some members and start a team over on the West Coast. Start up the West Coast Avengers. Yep. It was basically based on a suggestion issue 246. This happened like a little over a year after Hank Pym left the team. So Hawkeye took his smoking hot wife, Mockingbird. I'll explain this more when I get a chance to talk about Avengers West Coast. And he went out there and started the West Coast branch. And the Avengers also had the Mel storyline happen a few years after this. There's some really good stuff here, what happened in this period of time. And then something quite interesting happened, where we had some new members join the team in the 80s. 80s had a really, stacked roster. Yeah, there were a boatload of new members who joined the roster this period of time. Yes. Let's see if I can find it here. Excuse me. Let's see. Here we go. 80 saw the recruitment of several new people. Wonder Man officially joined the roster. Yes. We also had Tiger joining the team, along with She-Hulk, the Monica Rambeau. Yes, she joined the roster. As a matter of fact, she made her debut, not long before this. She made a debut in an issue of an annual for Amazing Spider-Man, annual 16. And then right after this, Roger Stern put her on the team. I'd say at least immediately. Monica Rambeau herself is definitely a character I would definitely love to discuss in that video because of how much this character keeps changing her name because Marvel half the time doesn't know what to do with this damn character. We also had Star Fox join the team. Yes, Star Fox. I'm thinking, Star Fox? You mean the N64 character? No, Thanos' brother. Yes, the brother of Thanos. Yeah. We also had Namor and Dr. Drew join him. That's interesting. Yes. That's who joined the group. And then somehow, prior to the upcoming event Inferno, the Avengers for some reason disbanded. Also, thanks to before I continue, thanks to the Undersea Storyline, the Avengers moved from the mansion to Hydro Base. Yes, Hydro Base. They were there for about 2 years, and then the island was sunk by Doctor Doom. Yes. But before I get to that, we have sort of a new lineup here. Basically, they came in the Avengers 300. We had Captain America with Thor, Gilgamesh, who also was the forgotten one. We also had new members with Mr. Fantastic, and of course, the Invisible Woman. Yeah, they all joined the team. Also, Demon apparently joined the team, even though he didn't officially join the roster. Yep. And the only member who did join this period of time was Quasar. Yeah, he was the last non-official one who did this. Yes. Now, the thing with basically other stuff that happened in this period of time, we also had... There was also another thing that Marvel did kind of experiment with this. Though, apparently DC had a lot more success for this in the 90s. Having annuals have their own storylines. You know, crossover annuals. There's a couple that Marvel did. Actually, about 3 of them. It was Atlantis Attacks, Evolutionary War, and I think that was it. Yeah, the decade ended with by far one of the best crossovers ever done in comic books. Axe Inventions. The event where all the suit villains swapped the heroes they were fighting. Basically, you had, like, a good example of this. You had the Mandarin fighting Spider-Man. Or even Magneto. Which, that was so cool. Yeah, the whole thing was put together by several different villains in the Marvel Universe. It was basically about a mysterious man in a suit. Turned out to be freaking Loki. Yes, we also had Kingpin, Doctor Doom, Red Skull. Surprisingly, no Green Goblin, because at this point, he was still dead. He did come back in the 90s. Yep. 80s is back a bit of rocky start, but still an excellent decade for the Avengers. Yep, and then we move into the 1990s, where it becomes a very odd period for the team. Yes, where, like, a lot of the time, we have to have this group involved in almost every single damn crossover happening in the 90s. I think it'd be like 1 or 2 at most. Yep, I'll discuss that in episode 63. And yes, I will be discussing other Avengers teams. Basically, I technically have already discussed Secret Avengers already, so I'm not going to talk about them. I am going to talk about the new Avengers. First team we're going to discuss, rather than first talk about the main team, is the Avengers West Coast. Force Works, because technically they are Avengers team. I am also going to have a brief episode talking about some of the brief spin-off books, like Avengers Solo / Spotlight, and Unplugged, which is a mini-series that came back in the 90s. Let's see. There's also going to be a talk about the Illuminati. Yes, I'll discuss them. And basically a lot of Avenger stuff for a while. And there's one guy I'm really hoping to get into, basically discussing some of his books, some of his characters. Jack Kirby. Yep, Jack Kirby. This guy created a lot of characters. Like, a lot of characters, when I discuss him, it'd be like, hey, I've heard of this character. Like, and your character's like, really? He created this character? Yeah. He has a whole gigantic warehouse of characters he created for comics over the course of 1940s to the 80s, which I'll discuss that at a later date. But next video is going to be Yoshimi Half the Princess, okay? See you next video. Bye.